We recently published a podcast on the Feather Thief story, a spectacular felony heist by a person who wanted rare and exotic feathers for fly tying. The story in the book, written by Kirk Wallace Johnson, started through a connection to today's guest. Today's guest is also a guide and expert on the waters of New Mexico, and today we're going to get you dialed into the hatches in the water that make this part of the Southern Rockies so unique. This is the Wet Fly Swing podcast, where I show you the best places to travel to for fly fishing, how to find the best resources and tools to prepare for that big trip, and what you can do to get back to the fish species we all love. Spencer Seim, fly fishing guide and classic fly tyer, is going to take us back into the world of the Feather Thief, this crazy, amazing story, and what his take-home message is on the overall book and the story. We also find out why he loves the drake hatch, why caddis should be on your list and on your radar throughout the year, and what else he has going in the fly tying space, including making his own hooks. Plus, we're going to find out why anglers are wearing helmets fishing the Rio Grande and why you can fish it without touching the water. Heading into Taos, here he is, Spencer Seim from ziafly.com.
How you doing, Spencer?
Hey, I'm great, Dave. Thank you for having me on.
Yeah, this is going to be a fun one today. I've been on the track of a couple of things going. The Feather Thief definitely is. We have an episode that's out there now with Kirk Wallace Johnson, who talked about the Feather Thief. You were a part of that, I think, early on in some of getting Kirk on. We're also going to talk about what you do in New Mexico, some of the famous waters you fish and guide, and kind of all of that. I think we might have a big New Mexico episode today. But before we jump into those big topics, why don't you give us a rundown on your background? Kind of what's your connection to fly fishing? Have you been doing this a while?
Yes. So I started fly fishing at 8 years old was the first time I picked up a fly rod. Now, I'm not from a fly fishing capital at all. I learned my ABCs in Lubbock, Texas. One of the flattest places on earth. They say it's so flat you can watch your dog run away for 3 days. But
Yeah.
but we would take vacations into the mountains of northern New Mexico, and I fell in love with the area from a young age. And I actually didn't have anyone start me into fly fishing. It was born out of sheer curiosity. And I saved up money to buy my first fly rod and started fishing on the Cimarron River as a kid. And then, I kept coming back each summer to do more fishing. And then I started working for Philmont Scout Ranch, the big Boy Scout ranch in the mountains in New Mexico. And I worked there throughout the 90s. And it was then that I could really explore the rivers in the Southern Rockies on my own time. And it's been an addiction ever since. I've been fly tying since I was 12. And my first fly was a woolly booger.
Yep.
And as so many of us started with. And I'm still tying flies to this day. And I'm fortunate to be able to call myself a fly fishing guide here in Taos area for the last 23 years.
Amazing. So yeah, you're in Taos, one of probably the most famous, the cities, at least for this, outdoors and fly fishing that, we've done some episodes around that area and the rivers. And we're going to talk about that today. I think it's going to be cool to hear your background from somebody who's been there for so long and give people kind of a guide, like we were saying, to New Mexico. But I maybe want to, start this off with the Feather Thief, because I feel like it's such a interesting, crazy story, and I feel like, Kirk, we said we'll have a link in the show notes to the episode we did with him, and there's obviously a book that he wrote. But the story of this kid, essentially, who goes and breaks in this heist of the century, right, to break in to steal these exotic birds and millions of dollars of all damage and, Darwin, and it's just this amazing story. But it kind of comes back to you a little bit, I think, from the start, at least where Kirk connected. Why don't you tell us that story? How do you connect with Kirk first and get him on this little lead, this journey?
Sure. Well, and it was out of pure luck that I met Kirk. I actually guided him. He had booked a full day guided fly fishing trip on the Red River with me in the year 2010. And we hit it off right away. He told me that he was hanging out in Taos. He had been done with USAID and working in Iraq, and he was here in Taos writing for the Wurlitzer Foundation. and he was writing books about wartime and things, and he really was trying to focus on something that wasn't such an intense topic. And so we got right into the fishing. And while we were on the river, I'd been tying classic salmon flies for a couple of years before I met Kirk. And a Jock Scott salmon fly fell out of my fly box when I went to change flies. And it caught his attention immediately. I was like, oh, darn, I didn't mean to drop that. And he picks it up and he just starts studying it. And he starts asking me these questions about, why do you have this fly in your box? Which was the first question. And I've had a theory that, since brown trout are related to Atlantic salmon, then they would respond really well to a Atlantic salmon fly. And my intent was to swing it across the Rio Grande and see if I could hook a big fish on it. And I hadn't yet. And so he wanted to know about the community of tying these things. And also the biggest question was, where are you getting the feathers to tie such a beautiful fly? Because I kind of went over in the fly of what each fiber was, what bird it came from. And at that point, I was pretty heavily involved in the classic salmon fly tying community. And I had known about this museum heist that had happened, and several of us tyers were talking about it, and a lot of these museum specimens were showing up on this forum for sale. And so when I told Kirk that I heard that this kid had broken into the Natural History Museum to steal feathers or steal birds for fly tying for these flies, I think it really took Kirk back, and I had no idea how far he was going to go with this.
Right.
And so that night we ended up having a beer together, and he's writing notes on a napkin, and he said, I'm going to write a book about this. And so he and I were inseparable for the months that followed. And then it took about 7 years, I think, to write the book for him to complete it. But I was giving him, names of people to interview, and he found out more than I even knew about the heist that had happened, about the break-in and stuff. So it was really interesting to help him put that story together. And, it turned out being stranger than fiction.
Right.
You get into the book and you're thinking, oh my gosh, like there's so many layers to this story. And of course, me being a classic salmon fly tyer as well, and also being part of this community, I'm still tying classics to this day. But it certainly has changed my perspective on where are we sourcing our materials from to keep tying these flies. And it really should be about good tying rather than what's the most rare bird I can strap onto a hook.
Right. Yeah, because I think that's one of the messages in the book that you get. You realize, there's a few of them. Like, one thing is a lot of these guys that I guess tie these classic flies don't also fly fish. And that's part of the strange thing about it, right? Because I said in the episode when I was talking to Kirk, I was like, hey, conservation is a huge part of everything we do, and I think a lot of fly anglers, because they realize if you don't protect their species, you're not going to have anything to fish for, and it's the right thing to do. But right. But it feels like a lot of these guys in this classic forum, or not the forum, but just in the classic world, really want the feathers regardless of the impacts to, endangered species or birds of paradise, right? They just feel like, and again, I don't want to stereotype, but I feel like, there's that's a message that came out in the book. Do you see that message, and did you see that in the forums?
Yeah, what that book caused is kind of a split within the community. And I'm still very close friends with a lot of members of the classic world. Definitely the heist being so notorious, we still have a lot of people in the community who refuse to use substitutes. They still feel like they need to use the exact called for species for a certain fly pattern, which, I really do follow the historical accuracy. However, even the old books recommend substitutes. And so you can be historically accurate and sustainably tying these at the same time. But it did wake up a lot of people in the community once we realized hey, one of our own has just committed a felony heist. And a lot of people started to wake up and start asking questions of, hey, where did this bird of paradise feather come from? Did it come from vintage taxidermy or an old fly tying kit? Or is this something that came right off of a museum specimen? And
Yeah.
that's a big thing to me, that it's getting people to ask the right questions. And I've been really surprised, on the salmon fly forums, which are now on Facebook, I'm seeing a lot more flies come up that are tied unbelievably well and don't contain a lot of the big no-no birds that could be questionable. Now, since this has also happened, there has been an obsession with some of the tyers of just getting into the rarities. And, there have been more heists that have taken place since The Feather Thief was written. As a matter of fact, right when the book came out, they were having a party at the Los Angeles Natural History Museum, and someone had broken into the case the night before and stole a resplendent quetzal. Which was very ironic that something had disappeared from that museum the night before the book drop party happened.
Oh, right.
I mean, and I don't know if that was connected to the salmon world or not. There are a lot of other people who want these rare birds for other reasons. It's not just fly tyers. But there's certainly, there still are some trading that's still going on and stuff. But it's interesting to me.
Yeah, and I think the other big part of this, I think why it's important, I think Kirk kind of talks about this and did a lot of research on it, was the connection to just the birds and Darwin and that history there of how important these birds are. It's not just like losing a few kind of, endangered species or whatever. It's like we might have lost something that could help, human history, right? We can understand more about these animals, right? That feels to me like one of the biggest losses on this, right? And that's why I think he was really trying to get people like, where are those missing 100 skins or whatever, right? Which I think they're still out there.
That's it. It's through these species that we found out that DDT was harmful. We can find out how their diets have changed over 100 years because we have these specimens, which are a timestamp of the day they were collected and that location. And when these things were collected, largely a lot of them in the 1800s and the early 1900s, the collectors didn't know about DNA at the time. They didn't understand DNA yet. We didn't know anything. And these specimens could still hold secrets that we still don't know about, that we're still learning. One of the big things is the evolution of color and what colors exist in nature. It was through these bird specimens that we found out that the color blue is actually a very rare color in nature, through the blue chatterer specimens. And it was amazing because of, just through the fly tying and then through working with Kirk on the book, it was really interesting to me because the stuff we were finding out about how these museums operate, and it's just amazing to me, the knowledge I've gained about how the science that we have on this, the studies, that the knowledge belongs to all of us, really. And it wasn't up to one fly tyer to, as someone quoted, liberate these birds from these dark drawers.
Right. Yeah, that's what made that was kind of the argument on the other side. I think that who was the heister?
Edwin.
Yeah, Edwin. Yeah, that was part of his argument. It was like, hey, these birds are just kind of sitting there in this dark drawer. They're kind of wasted.
And I think he was even making up his own scientific facts in those early interviews of, he said that you can't collect DNA off of something that's over 100 years old, which that was completely made up on the spot.
Yeah, exactly. That's why the story was so crazy, right? It's just and it all comes back to this Edwin character who is this kid who was, the phenomenal, I think people even coined him in, I think it was one of the magazines, the greatest fly tyer, the next generation, right? The most, magnificent fly tyer. And he turns out to be a pretty smart kid that did some things that, I don't know, you know what I mean? You look back, but he essentially got away with it, which is kind of kind of got away with it. He didn't even see any jail time, right? Which was kind of an interesting part of the story, right? A little turn of the story.
And to your listeners, they'll have to read the book as to find out why he didn't go to jail.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we don't want to give away the whole thing. We've already given away talking to Kirk most of the story in the
Oh, nice.
in the first episode. So I was kind of going with the assumption that many people had seen it. But I'm so interested in it. I just wanted to hear the backstory of it, and Kirk did a good job at that. But, well, where do you leave it? I mean, I want to get into some more of our fishing side of this episode. But
Sure.
when people, I'm sure you probably occasionally hear of this since you were connected to the book. Where do you leave people? Like they want to, I don't know, do more, help, I don't know, learn more. Is there anything people can do now or maybe to learn more about the story? Do you think it's good enough just to read the book and kind of end it there?
Well, so the story, I'm going to bring Kirk back into this, and I know he's not on the call, but the key takeaway that I wish, or that I really want people to take away from this book and the whole story is the fact that we need to be asking questions about where did our materials come from? Where did this come from? And I remember in the weeks right before the book dropped, Kirk and I were having a heated discussion over the phone. And I had just come back from California from his wedding and all of that. And he was saying, Spencer, you're still tying these flies. Are you asking where are these feathers coming from? In which now, of course, I have been. But it was very interesting to me because I had told Kirk, I said, listen, I saw the size of that diamond that you slid on your wife's finger. Did you, where did the diamond come from? And so, it's interesting. It's convenient for us as humans to, just basically be ignorant as to where things come from as long as we bought it legally, because everything has a source. And we need to start walking with a little bit more consciousness about where are our materials coming from. And it's been exciting to me because I've been actually getting into dyeing feathers, teaching my children how to dye feathers. And I'll take a turkey feather and I'll silk screen it to give it bars. And then I'll gradient dye it in different colors to make it look just like a Bangshan cockatoo tail feather. And so we're getting a lot more creative as far as coming up with the right look for these flies. I don't think classic salmon fly tying needs to go away. I think it needs to keep going forward, but just in a little bit more of a conscientious way.
Stonefly Nets builds handcrafted landing nets that are as tough as they are beautiful. They're shaped, sanded, and finished by hand from premium hardwoods. You'll feel the difference the moment you land your first fish. Light in the hand, strong at the hoop, and made by someone who knows what it means to earn your trust. You can head over to stoneflynets.com right now and see what they've got in the shop today. That's stoneflynets.com. Discover Smitty's Fly Box for premium flies. Their monthly subscription service delivers expertly crafted flies and materials tailored to your fishing environment. Boasting over 30 years of experience, Smitty's is your trusted source for a diverse range of flies. Enhance your fishing experience and make life easier with their carefully created selections. You can subscribe right now at smittysflybox.com and join a community of passionate anglers. You got me thinking when you're talking about dyeing. We had an episode with Dave McNeese. I'm not sure if you know about him, but yeah, you know Dave.
Oh, he's my hero.
Oh, there you go. Well, we had him on way back, and he's probably due for another episode, 155. But he talked about the story. I'll have to re-listen to that one. But he talked about the story with, I think it was like 8 federal black cars driving up to his house to confiscate all of his fly tying materials.
Oh, my gosh.
So it was a similar thing, right? This happened back in the day. I can't remember the exact dates, but they took everything, right? Because he was, I can't remember exactly what he was doing, but he was doing something I think he was selling and, feathers, right? Totally different than what we're talking about because, obviously, but yeah, it's interesting, right? So there is a history here. This is not a new, and actually you go back to the Birds of Paradise. I mean, think about, right, which Kirk talked about, the hats. Right? Back in the day when the women wanted these beautiful hats, so they were just killing birds left and right to get the bird,
right.
Yeah.
Well, and you remember back in the early 2000s when women were starting to put saddle hackle feathers in their hair.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
And so these ladies were going into fly shops and totally just cleaning out.
I remember that.
Whiting farms and things like that for fashion, which in the 1800s, it was the men going into the plumassiers, into the hat stores to get feathers for fly tying. It's been very interesting to see how fashion and function go back and forth.
It's amazing. Yeah, it's such a crazy story. Well, like we said, we'll put links out to the episode, the Feather Thief episode, and we'll put a link to the book as well because it's definitely worth a read. But let's jump into a little bit on what you do, because you're not only the the person that got Kirk interested into this, but you also guide out there. So maybe take us there a little bit. What is, maybe talk about your home waters or where you're guiding now and what that looks like.
Sure. Well, I'm based in Taos, New Mexico, which we are the northern part of New Mexico. I'm about 40 miles south of the Colorado border. The Rio Grande is our local watershed. And I like to I'm introducing people to the Rio Grande itself as well as the tributaries through fishing, of course. I guide southern Colorado, which, is just a short jump away, and of course, northern New Mexico. And the cool thing about Taos is that I can drive an hour and a half in any direction, and there's lots of creeks and rivers to fish. It's just amazing here between tailwaters and spring-fed creeks. We have a whole lot to offer here. And Taos has a very rich culture. We're a very unique place. It doesn't feel like you're in the United States here. The architecture, the people, it's just fascinating place to be. I do guide the Conejos River, which is the largest tributary to the Rio Grande. And the Conejos has a reputation for being feast or famine. It's a tough nut to crack to be successful on that river. And I've actually put a lot of my time and energy into learning that river, and I'm always learning, but connecting people to fish on that river. And then, of course, the Rio Grande itself sits in the bottom of this 900-foot deep gorge that's just a giant crack in the earth. So it takes some work to get there. But once you're there on the river, the fishing is very unique. Around here, they say it's unique because you sneak up on them. But
yeah, yeah.
But we have a lot of wild browns. Our native fish here is the Rio Grande cutthroat, which is coming back beautifully in a few of our streams around here. We've had cutthroat restoration projects happening. The Rio Grande itself, we also, on the lower part of the river, there's a lot of smallmouth bass. We, of course, have carp. We have pike. We have all kinds of things in that river.
Yeah.
It's an adventure getting in the gorge, and then after a day of fishing, trying to get yourself out of the gorge is fun. And then the other thing that's also exciting here is the human history of this area goes back thousands of years. So, you can be hiking out of the gorge, look on the side of a basalt boulder, and there's petroglyphs right there. And who knows how long that was done? 1,500 years ago, maybe the Anasazis, and stuff. And then I've seen on a lot of rocks where someone had, carved a turtle or an elk on the side of a rock. You would see that someone else came by and carved a giant cross over that. And what that was is the Spanish conquistadores who came through, carving crosses over all of what they thought were pagan symbols. And so it's just fascinating. The fish lead us down this road of learning about culture, architecture, geology, all of it. And it all comes together here in Taos.
Yeah, it does. Wow, that's really cool. So, and New Mexico, when you look at it, it's got a few hubs. I mean, Taos is one you hear a lot about. You've also got kind of out of Albuquerque and that down in that direction. I mean, what do you think are the kind of the top? I mean, you mentioned the Rio Grande. What do you think of the top 5, 6 streams that people are coming to New Mexico that are kind of coming to fish?
Yeah, the Costilla Creek is one, which is the home to the Rio Grande cutthroat. Anyone that's wanted to go after that, that's a great place for it. The Rio Grande is also on that list. And the Conejos it is just over the border into Colorado, but we still consider it our area. The Cimarron River, which is my home waters where I learned how to fly fish. That's a tailwater, goes right through a state park there. There's also the Rio Chama, which is another Rio Grande tributary. that's to the west of Taos. And the Los Pinos is another river that winds in and out of the Colorado-New Mexico border. That was a very well-kept secret up until about 10 years ago. The secret got out, and there's more people on that river. Those are the main highlighted streams here.
Yeah, and that's kind of when you'd say maybe that Taos area, like how far does that extend? Because there's other areas around New Mexico, right, that people would probably know about too.
Right. So, when people think of fly fishing New Mexico, the first river that comes to mind is the San Juan.
Yeah, the San Juan, right.
The San Juan's a 3-hour drive from here. And I've got, great stretches of the Chama, which I would have to be passing by to get to the San Juan. So the Taos area, I would say, is going to cover about an hour and a half north, south, east, or west from here is all accessible from someone who's staying here in Taos for day trips to check out different places to fish.
Yep. Gotcha. So yeah, there's plenty up in that area. If we were coming in, it's, this episode, I always kind of go back to that when these are, it's April, May, June. When does the season start for you? Are you fishing year round out there? How's that look?
There is year-round fishing here. The Rio Grande is fishable year-round. It never completely ices over, even in the colder winters. There are a lot of warm springs that feed into the Rio Grande, keeping the water temperatures just perfect for fishing in the winter. And then there's also the Red River, which is fishing year-round. Now, I would say, the winter fishing here is a little bit more for your diehards. And if you're fishing in the gorge in the winter, you're probably going to have about an hour and a half of the sun being on the water,
right.
because our gorge runs north-south. This year we have a very low snowpack year right now. We're actually really well below normal snowpack. So normally I would say in early May, runoff starts and really stays thumping till about mid-June. And then we're fishing all the way into late October on most of the streams here. But this year, I think we're going to be fishing, we're fishing great right now. The caddis hatch on the Rio Grande is something that's just incredible right now. And, I think we're going to be fishing probably up until late July, early August, unless we get a monsoon. Because water temps could be our issue this year.
Right.
But yeah, it's, Taos is wonderful because if you've got runoff when you're here, next year, maybe if we got the snowpack, if we do have the runoff, there's always the Cimarron and the Costilla Creek, which are both tailwaters to go to. So, there's always something that's fishing well 12 months a year.
Gotcha. So right now, as you're saying, April, the caddis are on right now.
Mm-hmm. It is on right now.
Yeah, it is. What's that look like for the caddis? That's always a fun one to look into. What do you guys, how are you fishing that hatch? Is that something that you're hitting in the evening, or what does that look like?
Yeah, it's, the caddis hatches are going to start off. We do have a late morning hatch that takes off, and then the evenings is when it starts to get really thick. Anytime after 4:30, going all the way to like 7, you've got bugs in your glasses. They are all over the surface film, and it is on. And every fish is looking up. Right now it is, because our water is actually clear enough to where the fish actually see the hatch. Some years we have the bugs, but the water's too high and muddy, and the fish don't see it.
Yeah, that's right. Because this time of year, you would typically have. When is the typical runoff? We've heard that's been changing. Like typically, you might have a June like high water time, but it's maybe a little earlier now. What's that look like for you guys?
Right. So this year, any bit of runoff. I've heard that the Rio Grande is already peaked, and right now it's April 14th.
Yeah.
Being a low water year, but yeah, it has been happening. Our springs have been getting warmer faster. And so therefore it's going to start bringing the runoff down earlier every year, is what we've seen. It's been really interesting. But generally, when people are calling me wanting to come out to fish and they want to be pretty much guaranteed that we're in optimal time, I always let the people know that, the best fishing starts around Father's Day. That's when I can say that every river in our area is fishing well.
Really? So Father's Day is a good time. Okay.
Amazing time.
Amazing time. Well, and before we get into that time on the caddis, give us a couple. What does that look like? How are you fishing the caddis hatch? Are you using dries mostly? What's that look like?
I start off a lot of times with double dries. If I'm fishing the lower stretches that have bigger water features, larger eddies, not a lot of variance in currents, I can go double dry, combine that with a couple of different caddis patterns. Our caddis around here are going to be fished roughly about the size 16 tan elk hair caddis.
Yep.
And of course, with there being so many bugs on the water, you're having to compete with the natural bugs. You need yours to look better. And so I like to fish double dry. I don't like to fish them in tandem. I don't do the tying to the bend of the hook
right.
and all that because I don't get a good drift. I like to fish two different patterns that are tied on separate tag ends of the leader, of the tippet there. Yeah, but I tried two different variants. And then when I figure out what they're keying in on, then I'm going to switch to one fly. I very seldom would run a dropper off of a caddis fly while we have a hatch on.
Gotcha. So what does that setup look like when you have the two flies on? How are you doing that? You have a main fly and then you have, what's your dropper look like?
So if I'm fishing two flies, if I'm doing two dries, I'm going to run a 9-foot 4X leader. We can get away with 4X on the Rio Grande because there's enough color to the water. But up about 10 inches up into the tip of that leader, I'm going to tie on about 16 inches of tippet material, of 4X tippet material. So I have two ends of my leader that I can tie a different bug on. And now if I do run dry dropper, if I'm starting to see that maybe I need to get something down there into the fish a little bit lower, I will run a caddis pupa off of it and just do dry dropper that way. And that's trying to cover my bases.
yeah, that's it. Caddis dropper. And the pupa, what would be a pattern that there's a lot of different patterns, but essentially you're just imitating the bug as it's kind of getting ready to hatch. Is that kind of what you're doing or coming up?
Yeah, exactly. I like to, and even with the pupa, I do change different colors of greens. Sometimes I'll use a little bit more of a bright lime green, and there are times that I go a little bit more Kelly green even. And with that, it depends on the day entirely and how the sun is showing down on the fly. That can really help us determine what's the perfect color that day. It never hurts to actually have several really bright green flies in your box and then carry some Prismacolor markers and shade them in a little bit as you go until you get locked in on that right color. A lot of us fly tyers know that naturally when a fly gets into the water and gets wet, the color will change. Typically it's going to go darker most of the time. So that's always something to keep in mind. But when I'm tying my caddis flies, caddis patterns, I do tend to err on the brighter side first.
Yeah, that's a good tip, right? Because it's going to be a little bit darker once it hits the water.
Mm-hmm.
And what is the pupa? What is that pattern? What would be one that you would be tying? What would that look like?
So there is I'm trying to remember the originator of the fly. It was the pupa.
Oh, the pupa. Okay.
Right? Yeah. And just a little tiny bit of chenille.
Oh, yeah, the pupa, right.
Mm-hmm. And I really, really like that fly. It really works well here. And then there's also another fly that was developed years ago by Gary LaFontaine.
Yep.
And it's not a free form body on the fly or on the hook. It's tied directly onto the hook, but it's what I'll do is actually dub really bright green dubbing very sparsely up the shank of that hook, and then add a little bit of some brown ostrich herl on the very front, right behind the eye, or right behind the bead if I'm using a bead head. And what that ostrich herl does is it gives motions of legs just a little bit. And sometimes a little bit of motion can really trigger some of those picky fish, especially the fish that are looking at a whole lot of naturals. You want yours to look way better,
Right. Right. That's awesome. Yeah, definitely the pupa, the sparkle pupa. I think that is part of the Gary LaFontaine, Gary Borg. There's a few guys that were involved in all that, but those are huge. Yeah, I mean, depending on how you tied it, but that's essentially a little, like you said, size 16, kind of a green, imitating what, like a green rockworm or something like that, right?
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
Perfect. So cool. Well, that's a little bit on the caddis. Let's take it to a little bit later, like you said, around the June time period when things start heating up. How do things change there? What does that mean on those rivers? And are you still fishing? I mean, you've got all those rivers you mentioned. Are you really starting to focus on one during that time?
Yeah, that is when I'm heading up northwest of Taos. I'm going to be focusing heavily on the Conejos River as well as the Los Pinos. And the reason why is because mid to late June is when the drakes start to come off. We start off with green drakes earlier in the season, and then after a few weeks of the drake hatch, we start to see more gray drakes on the river. The drake hatches are just spectacular. I mean, it's a big giant mayfly that offers a ton of protein for these fish, and they're quick to take them. Of course, on the Los Pinos, we also have yellow sallies taking off at the same time. All of a sudden, you get some golden stones. You're going to get some salmon flies coming off, the big giant stoneflies. But the drakes tend to be the most exciting of all of the hatches around here for early summer. That's where you can look up the river and you can literally locate just about every single fish just from the rises.
Oh, wow. God,
it's amazing. Oh, yeah. It's amazing here.
Wow. And are you fishing the drake hatch? Is that totally different than how you'd be fishing some of these other patterns as far as where you're finding the fish and presenting the fly?
It's interesting. If I'm fishing the drake hatch, those fish are keying in on those in the riffles a whole lot. You might be able to trick a fish into eating your fly in some of the eddies, but a lot of times that's where the fish gets a better look at the bug. And so you might get refusals there. I like to always keep those flies in moving water so that the fish have to make a split-second decision. And just like with the caddis hatch, if the drake hatch is on, I'm going to start with a double dry. I'm going to use I tie a split hair wing drake with, I use a deer hair that's been dyed green. Mm-hmm. I did a Lebowski series of flies last year, and my drake dry fly is actually called the Dude.
Oh, nice.
And so I always like to start off with the Dude because he's the one that the fish key in on the most. I do also, and I know that the fly shops sometimes don't like me saying this, but a hatch like the drake hatch that's such a prolific thing. I've had customers go into the local fly shop on the Conejos River and look at what drakes are in their bins and don't use those.
Yeah, right.
And I know those guys are going to hate me for saying it. I still say go in and support your local fly shop. But when it comes down to drakes in mid-season, look and see what those fish are looking at, because those fish know the inventory of all the local fly shops.
Right. Good point.
Yeah. Come up with your own variant. I do, sometimes if I'm hackling, I've got a thick, nice hackle around that wing on my drake. If I get refusals on it, sometimes I'll try to get that fly to sit a little lower by clipping off some of the bottom hackle off of the fly. Mm-hmm. Just change it just a little bit, and maybe that's going to trigger the strikes. Now, the gray drakes are a lot of fun. I do recommend, if you're tying flies for the gray drakes, to tie with the lightest gray you can find, because it will naturally get a little darker when it hits the water. And of course, we get into those golden stones that start off around early July, and that's stimulator season.
Yeah, stimulators. Okay. And do you guys you mentioned the big stones. Is that a hatch that you're fishing as well? Do you get many of the big stones?
Oh yeah. It's talk on the river. I mean, I'll be getting together with my guys that are guiding upstream on the Conejos, and I'm downstream, and they'll come down and say, man, the Goldens, they're starting right now, and boy, we got to start getting up there. And Typically on the Conejos River, the hatches start earlier in the year on the lower stretches. And then as you go up the river, it starts later and later and later.
Today's episode is brought to you by Grand Teton Fly Fishing. They're a top guide service and fly shop with access to some of the most prized waters in western Wyoming. And their guide team brings together over 200 years of local experience. Their goal is simple, to share these amazing resources and help you experience the thrill of a native cutthroat rising to a single dry fly, all in the shadows of the Tetons. It's the kind of experience that stays with you and fosters a deep appreciation for the waters we love. You can check them out right now at grandtetonflyfishing.com. And if you book a trip, let them know you heard about them through this podcast today. If you've been holding off on getting a new fly rod because of the price tag, San Juan Rodworks just changed the game. These rods are dialed in with the right action, clean design, and built to fish hard without the high price tag. Whether you're stripping streamers, tight lining, or dead drift and dries, they've got a setup that feels right from the first cast. And the best part is you can try any rod, reel, or fly line for 30 days risk-free. And if you're not 100% satisfied, you can send it back for a full refund. Check them out right now. That's sanjuanrodworks.com. SANJUAN Rodworks.com. You support this podcast by checking in with San Juan now. So it sounds like, yeah, pretty much, I mean, you've got everything, all the big hatches for the most part out there, all the western hatches. And then as you get into the season, I guess depending on the temperatures and things like that, does that start to get a little warm up there? What does that look like?
August is a pretty slow month. You know, we are tootling around in the high country quite a bit more often. In August, I start moving a lot of my guided trips to a stretch that I have access to on the upper Culebra Creek, which is outside of San Luis, Colorado. There's a creek that's flowing right out of this mega ranch, and we can find cooler water up there in August. But yeah, water temps are really something to keep an eye on. And, you know, a lot of times, if it's August, we're going to be fishing first light in the morning, and we'll probably be wrapping it up around noon or 1 o'clock when that water temp's up above 67 degrees. Might as well give those fish a break.
Yeah, it's gonna, right. And then the fall transition is kind of, when does that typically start? When do you start getting some of the hatches there?
Late September is when the fall stuff starts to take off. We have quite a nice trico hatch in late September, lasts all the way through a lot of October. That's going to start around 10 in the morning and go up until about noon. And that's just clouds and clouds of bugs. Fall fishing is interesting because the water is low and clear. And you're going to be doing a lot more dry fly fishing in the fall because there are a lot of grasses that grow in the river and stuff. So droppers, you're sometimes going to do it a disservice on that. And then when we get into October, I move back into the Rio Grande, and the Rio Grande fall fishing is the place to be. And, try to find your own personal goat trail that no one knows about, get down into the gorge and see if you can trick some fish.
Right. That's awesome. No, I love that you brought it back to the Rio Grande because I feel like that's one that would be cool. You know, I mean, they'd all be cool to fish, but that one for sure because of what it is, the name. What is the gorge? So is this something where it's mostly hiking in, or are you able to get boats in that gorge?
You know, our area is very unique on that. So if it's high enough to float, it's probably too high to fish. It is an extremely technical boating river. There's, for the boater, the area like the wild and scenic rivers that we have that's a section of the Rio Grande National Monument. It's called the Razor Blades there, and it is class 5, even in class 6, because of the steep gradient and the giant boulders. So everything, for most purposes is going to be walk in and wade. I don't recommend, if you're going into the Wild Rivers area, I don't recommend wearing waders. I've seen more accidents happen from people aspiring to wade the river up there. And if you keep your feet dry and you just play Frogger and you just jump up and you just go from dry rock to dry rock, you can access all the river you need to. And dry feet will keep you a lot safer. That basalt just turns into slick as ice if your feet are wet. So I recommend just, wear a nice pair of hiking shoes and quick dry pants in case you do take a dip and all that. I have seen people down there fishing wearing helmets and protective gear because it's pretty unpredictable. You hook into a fish of a lifetime and you're trying to keep that guy on. You're hopping from boulder to boulder trying to
Wow.
not let him break off. It turns into a contact sport.
No kidding.
And I do, but it's a unique experience, that's for sure.
So it's just it sounds like it's a series of just giant boulders that you're able to you don't even have to touch the water necessarily.
Right. You don't really have to get your feet wet. Now, downstream of the Red River dumps in at a place called La Junta. Downstream of that, there is, it's totally okay to wade the Rio downstream of that confluence. But above the Red River confluence, yeah, it's dry foot zone.
I see. So above the Red River, and that's the area that you're usually covering?
Mm-hmm. Well, we're all over the place.
Yeah, you're
really.
everywhere.
Yeah, we're all over. Now, I try to, being a guide for as long as I've guided here, I've got enough horror stories of having injuries, having a customer getting hurt.
Oh, right.
Down in the bottom of the gorge, and you're thinking, how am I going to get this guy out of here? So I typically, if I'm actually guiding, I'm not usually going to be in wild rivers unless I've got someone who I know is perfect for that setting. I'll send people over there on their own risk because the fishing can be just fantastic. But there's a couple of easier trails to get down into and longer riffle runs and bigger areas to wade right through the Rio.
Yeah.
And I can produce a really nice guide trip on a lot of that stuff. But yeah, the really hard to get to stuff, I like to keep that one as day off water.
Yeah, I gotcha. Day off water, yeah. And then when you're in there in that fall period, kind of hopping the rocks, you're just fishing dries mostly? Is that what that looks like in the fall?
Mm-hmm. Yep. And I use a lot more attractor patterns in the fall if I'm hopping from rock to rock, and I'm sight fishing quite a bit. And, it's a lot of fun. You can start picking up some rocks in the Rio and finding out the bug life that's in there. They will be very eager to grab a size 16 olive pheasant tail if it's drifting in front of them the right way. You can go with your standard fare in there. Late fall, the browns actually start to spawn. They start running up the Red River to spawn. And I like to leave those guys alone when they're up in there.
In October? Is that,
yeah. Late October, all through November, you start to see browns start to run up the tribs and to spawn. And I like to leave those guys alone during that time. Let the fish factory generate some more fish for us.
Yep, right. And our browns, so you got the browns you mentioned, the cutthroat, the Rio Grande cutthroat. Are there other species in that reach?
In the Rio Grande, of course, the Rio Grande cutthroat is the native fish that we have that should be here. Our Trout Unlimited group here works with New Mexico Game and Fish, and we actually backpack fingerlings in to the Rio every year. Every year we go down in there with a whole bunch of fingerlings.
Yeah, in the gorge.
Mm-hmm. Down in the gorge, and they turn it into a big party, But we have browns. We also have carp. Some nice big carp. Some pushing 5 pounds.
Wow.
And we do have northern pike in here as well. The northern pike, I believe, were introduced in the 1920s to kind of control the carp population. And we know how that worked out.
Yeah, right.
it really hurt our cutthroat numbers. The browns as well. I mean, they've been doing a job of keeping the cutthroat numbers down as well. But yeah, it's neat in the Rio because you just never know what you're going to hit. I mean, heck, we've got river otters like crazy. It's really neat to get down in there and see you're not just in a trout stream. It's a living, breathing thing that's just got all kinds of wildlife.
Amazing. Yeah, that seems like the Rio Grande for sure would be on the list. Once you get out there, and you're saying if you had to pick a time, that October, maybe September, early October would be a good time to go.
Exactly. That's when the water temperatures are coming down. The fish they know that the famine is coming, and they're going to load up on calories.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, let's start to take it out of here with our this is our tip segment we're going to get into. You've actually shared a number of these great tips to get us focused, but I'm thinking about, again, we're putting together a trip. Let's just take it to that fall period on the Rio Grande. What are a few things you're telling somebody, either maybe they're on the water with you to kind of have more success, while you're out there?
Well, sure. In the fall, some of the biggest tips that I like to pass along is to wear natural colors. You can leave the red hat or a yellow hat, orange, any of those non-natural colors, leave it at home. Almost dress like a hunting trip.
Right. So camo's okay if you wanted to go like full on. Yeah.
Camo is good. Yep. There you go. And even blue is okay. I mean, heck, the sky's blue. And I do recommend taking a casting lesson. Really get to where you're proficient at a 25-foot cast with a soft laydown if we're going to be hitting dry fly. And then also, I do recommend bringing at least a 9-foot rod. 5 weight is ideal for the trout. Bring that 7 weight if we're going to go after some pike, after some northerns, in which I'll bring the steel leaders and all that. And then also just being aware of what the weather is doing. If I see rains in the forecast for that afternoon, I mean, those storms, if you're in the bottom of the gorge, you can't see them coming from a distance. So when it comes, it could come hard. And, we get mudslides and we get, those rocks are just slicker than snot if it's raining and things are wet. So always being really, really aware of the weather forecast is a huge thing. And also being prepared to hike down into the gorge. We sit at an altitude of 7,000 feet above sea level, which is fine for most folks. But if you're from sea level and you don't exercise much, probably might not want to hike down into the gorge. The Rio Grande actually does have a few vehicle accessible spots where we can be successful. I mean, we're going to see some people and maybe more stocked trout because they do stock a lot of rainbows still. But for the wild stuff, getting into the areas that are kind of been held secret and things like that, you kind of have to come with your A game and be prepared to get skunked because it could happen. And so the realistic expectations just need to be in check of, hey, I'm going to go down to the gorge and spend some time on the water today. It's going to be a lot of fun. And that's what we're looking for. We're showing up with an open mind. You might want to see some bighorn sheep, some petroglyphs, some geology that you probably hadn't seen before. So coming in with an open mind, realistic expectations is huge.
That's it. Nice. And and it sounds like you've said what makes this unique. I mean, it's got all the hatches, but also it's more than just the fishing kind of. It sounds like a pretty unique area. Is that how you explain to others how this is different than different parts of the West?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, it's very much unique.
Nice. Well, we will definitely, and we'll have some links here. I wanted to get into a couple of random ones for you with you here before we get out of here. And you mentioned some injuries, things like that, but I did hear, did you have a little bit of music in your background?
Oh, not too terribly much. I mean, I've played guitar since I was a kid and stuff, but, I went through a phase when I was trying to sing old cowboy songs and folk songs and stuff.
Yeah.
But now after, I've got so many things that I'm into these days, aside from fly tying and fishing. I'm also a salmon fly hook maker. I make hooks from scratch. And over the last year, I've gotten into watchmaking as well. So it's needless to say, I'm always working to keep a steady hand.
Yeah. Wow. So you're actually making the hooks, the classic salmon hooks.
Mm-hmm. Yep. I make them myself. I use a annealed steel that shows up to me that's completely soft. You can bend it with your bare hands. And I actually have a barb cutter that actually cuts the barb into the steel if I'm doing something for display to look like the old salmon hooks. And then I do all the hook point shaping with files in a vise. And then I have bending jigs that I bend the hook steel around to get the hook shape. And my neighbor is a gunsmith, and we actually do all of our hardening, tempering, and finishing of the hooks at his place. And I do my own Japan black recipe, which is the same stuff they use for Ford Motor Company for the Model Ts. And I make that mixture myself and put that onto the hooks and bake it in. It's a long, long process, but the cool thing is that I can make any shape that I've ever dreamed of in a hook, because now I have that freedom to do so.
Wow. Yeah, taking it to the next level. That's
Yeah.
awesome. What would you tell somebody who was interested in getting into tying classic salmon flies? You know, like maybe they've tied a little bit, but
Mhm.
where would they start? What do you think is a good place to start to learn about it?
So the first thing is to ignore I say to ignore a lot of the books that have been written recently.
Mm,
Go back to the source. There's a book that was written by Captain Hale, Hale, and he had a book called How to Tie Salmon Flies. And it's a thin book. It doesn't have a ton of recipes in there, but his techniques are spot on.
nice.
And also, I recommend we have a new classic tyer. Get in. I know that Facebook is probably an easy way to get to be a part of the community. Express that you're wanting to get into tying these things, and start with a pattern like a Red Rover, that or a Kate, a pattern that's really simple that doesn't have a lot of extras, and work on tying that fly, and then post the fly on one of these groups. And you better have thick skin, because some people are going to tear you apart,
Yep.
but it's all for your own good to becoming a good fly dresser.
Yeah, that's right. And this is a lot different than. Is it a lot different than just regular fly tying? You know, when you think about
Mm-hmm.
tying a steelhead fly or something like that, this is a whole different level.
It is a whole different level. Now, the steelhead tires definitely use a lot of crossover techniques that come from classic fly tying. Dave McNeese, being one of the
Yeah.
masters, is unbelievable at tying these flies, and he's more of a steelhead guy. But yeah, so I think the materials are going to be different. I try to always avoid using modern threads. I do recommend getting a hold of real silk thread. A lot of the fly shops, online fly shops, carry it. It's a company called 54 Dean Street. They actually make a real silk thread. And don't use dubbing wax. There is a recipe to make your own wax really easily. Or some of us, if any of your listeners are wanting to get into tying the classics, they can get a hold of me and I'll send them some wax.
Mm-hmm. Oh, nice.
Yeah, and it's difficult, but it's not impossible. It's a lot of fun once you can start tying flies that look good.
Yeah, exactly. What are the groups out there? You mentioned the Facebook. Are there? Could you just search classic, salmon flies sort of thing? How would you find the groups?
The first group is Classic Fly Tying. It's all one word on Facebook. And then the other one is Classic Salmon Fly Tying, all separate words. Those are two groups on Facebook that I recommend anyone check out. You've got some of the greatest tyers in the world as part of this, and everyone is willing to help. We're not setting up anyone for failure, and it's a worldwide community. So if you post a fly, you might get someone from Scotland or the UK chiming in on some pointers. And that's what I love about the salmon fly tying community, is that it's worldwide.
Do you occasionally see guys out there swinging one of these flies for a salmon?
In this area, I've got some guys that practice some spay casting on the lower Rio Grande. And we don't have really a wide enough river. I think micro spay kind of works. And switch rods is a good way to go for the lower Rio, just to practice your swing. But if I'm going to fish one of my classics, I'm going to fish it with a single hand 6-weight rod. And I like to cast across the stream, let that fly swing across the current as I maintain tension, and you'll feel that strike if and when it happens.
Yeah. You mentioned at the start that Jock Scott. Have you had any success with the Browns with that one?
Well, that particular fly, I actually had a feeling that something was going to come of this story. So that fly I put it aside.
Oh, right.
I put it away. I still have it. It's actually, that fly is in the book itself. There's a photograph of it. And that fly is actually the cover of the Swedish copy of the Feather Thief.
Okay.
But yeah, I've actually had a lot of success on a fly called the Fiery Brown. The Jock Scott, I was still a little green when it came down to what would these fish take. And a Jock Scott, being king of the classics, has so many elements, making it very difficult to tie. And so I don't need to go that fancy, especially if I've got a brown that's got teeth that's going to tear that fly up anyway.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So I stick to some simpler patterns. The Fiery Brown is by far and large my favorite fly to swing here. There's another one called Old Blue, which is an old Irish fly that's a little bit simpler to tie as well. And I forgot to tell you that a lot of my salmon flies that I'm tying them traditionally, which means that I'm not using a vise or a bobbin.
Okay. Wow.
I still do tie a lot in my vise, but I do tie in hand a lot.
In hand, right? Wow. Okay, so you've got the extremes going here. You're
what's cool about tying in hand is you can tie anywhere. You can go to a kid's soccer game and tie a fly.
Oh, yeah. Right. Right. That's really cool. So that's not an easy thing to do, right? I mean, have you been doing that for quite a while?
I started tying in hand about 6 years ago. And my son was only 2 years old. I have an 8-year-old son, and he was 2, and I was hanging out at home with him, and I really I couldn't just sit at my desk and tie and watch this crazy kid at the same time. So I had to come up with something more portable. And one of my fly tying mentors, his name is Adrian Cortes.
Oh, yeah, Adrian, right.
Adrian he's really the one that got me into tying in hand. I met him when I was tying at the 2016 Atlantic Salmon Fly International in Seattle, and I started seeing my heroes tying in hand, and I was like, man, I got to try that. And it's a learning curve, but it's a lot of fun once you can look at it, once you can hold up a fly you're proud of and say, I did this with my hands.
I know. God, that is great. We've got an episode with Adrian. I think it was a while back. Actually, he was on In the Bucket, our In the Bucket podcast series with Brian Niska. So that wasn't too long ago here earlier this year. Him and Richard were on. They talked about, that was a good episode as well. So we'll get a link out to that one too. So this has been good, Spencer. I think that this has been awesome to hear. I mean, really starting out from the Feather Thief and ending back with the feathers has been great. But you obviously have everything going on. We'll leave everybody a link to ziafly.com if they have questions for you. And any last words for anybody as we head out of here as far as your program? Or did we cover it pretty well and, high level?
Well, yeah, just if you got any questions, please ask. I'm happy to help with anything from fishing to fly tying, hook making questions, fire away, and I'm very accessible. So if you plan on coming out here to Taos, just know that we are a low water year this year. The earlier you can get here, the better. I think July and August might be a little warm and low for us here. So if you want to come to Taos, either hit it in the first part of the summer or wait and come out this fall.
Okay. And then, then the fall will circle back around when temperatures cool down.
Exactly.
Yeah. Perfect. Okay. Awesome, Spencer. Well, we'll be in touch, and thanks again.
Thank you, Dave. I really appreciate it.
Call to action today. If you haven't yet, check in with Spencer. You can do that at ziafly.com. Go to zia_fly on Instagram. Let him know you heard this podcast, and let him know you are interested in learning more about New Mexico. And if you have a feather thief question, he might be able to answer, especially when it comes to the classic fly tying. If you haven't already, you can subscribe to this podcast and make sure you get that next episode delivered right to your inbox. The next one is, as always, a good one. CJ's Real Southern Podcast. Chad Johnson is back for his monthly series on fishing trophy trout, and not only on the White River, but around the country. Chad Johnson's here. He's going to be bringing it, so I hope you can check that one out. If you haven't heard, Wet Fly Swing Pro, this is the shop where we're doing stuff, building our own trips, building trips together. We're doing a launch, and we're doing this 4 times per year. And if you want to go to wetflyswing.com/pro, you can sign up there, get your name on the list, and I'll follow up with you when we get that next launch going out there. And you can get access to Wet Fly Swing Pro, and I'll fill you in on the more details there. All right, I got to get out of here. Hope you have a great evening. Hope you're having a great morning. And if it's afternoon, hope you're having a good lunch, or maybe you're on the river. Appreciate you for stopping in today, and look forward to hearing from you and maybe talking to you on the next episode.